There's a version of performing that nobody calls out. Not the obvious stuff, not the man who's trying to look impressive or inflate his ego. I'm talking about something quieter than that, harder to name, harder to see in yourself. I'm talking about the man who shows up every week, who serves, who knows the language, who looks from every angle anyone can see like he has it all together. And somewhere underneath all of it, he is managing a gap between who he appears to be and who he actually is. That man is performing and nobody is checking on him because he looks fine. So this episode is for him, and honestly, it was for me. Most men who are performing do not think of themselves as performers. They think of themselves as responsible, reliable, put together. The performance is invisible to them because they have reframed it as something noble, something necessary. Here's what actually it looks like. It's the man who always has the answer because uncertainty feels like weakness. It is the man who stays busy and calls it work ethic because stillness would force him to feel something. It is the man who is generous to everyone around him. But if you look closely, it is really about being needed, being seen as good. And it is the man who talks about his faith publicly, who serves, who leads, who shows up, while privately keeping God at arm's length. Because getting too close to God means getting too honest, and honest is a risk he's not sure he can afford. None of that looks like performance from the outside. It looks like strength. It looks like discipline. It looks like faithfulness. But underneath it, there is a man who is exhausted, not from the work, from the management. I know what that management feels like because I lived it for years. What I was carrying was something I had never said out loud to most people. I was hiding a struggle with gender identity for years, and hiding itself became the full-time job. I was not performing to look impressive. I was performing to survive, afraid of losing everything I had built, afraid of what exposure would cost me. So I kept the lid on and I kept showing up. And from the outside, I looked like I had it together. That is the performance nobody talks about. Not the man chasing status, the man who is terrified that if anyone saw what was actually going on inside him, it would be over. I carried that for a long time. And then on one night, it cracked open. I was sitting with a woman. She was doing my makeup, and I looked directly into her eyes, not at her eyes, through them. And one thought thundered through my head so loudly I could not ignore it. Oh my God, I can't do this anymore. This is crazy. And I stopped almost immediately. What followed was not relief. It was a different kind of anxiety because now instead of managing the struggle, I was waiting for it to come back. When is it coming back? When is it coming back? It did not come back. And that left me with a question I did not know how to answer. What happened to me? I didn't manufacture that moment. I did not will it into existence. Something shifted that I had no language for. About 6 months later, I walked into a church for the first time, and I started reading the Bible, cover to cover. I finished in 7 weeks. I want to be clear about what that was and what it was not. It was not devotion. It was not discipline. It was investigation. Something had happened to me that I could not explain, and I needed to know if the Bible could tell me what it was. I needed answers. That is what seeking actually looks like sometimes. Not polished, not religious, just a man who who experienced something he cannot explain, chasing it down. I kept showing up, I kept serving, and I still had not fully arrived at what it means to have a real personal relationship with Christ. I was in the building, I was active, but I was still managing a gap. Now, a year or two after that, I found a wine bottle under the sink, and I realized the woman I was with had a drinking problem that I had not seen coming. So I went to Al Anon. I wanted to be honest with you about why I went. I did not go for myself. I went to fix her problem. I walked in thinking I was going to get the tools on how to handle someone else's situation. That's honestly how I framed it. That's honestly how a lot of people frame it. What I found was something else. A secular program using the big book cracked open something that years of church activity had not touched, not because the church failed, but because that tool met me exactly where I was. I came in through a door labeled for someone else and walked out changed. The steps gave me a framework for reality, vulnerability, honesty, the willingness to risk it all to do what is right, the ability to be secure in any situation and open to change, and a clarity about what I actually needed to put my eyes on. You do not always find yourself through the door you expected. I was serving in church, active, engaged, and present, and I thought I was doing it right. And then one night at 11:30, my interim pastor messaged me asking me to lunch the next day. That conversation shook me. I processed it for weeks, and what I eventually had to admit to myself was this. I had been worshiping with my pastor and my church, not Christ. I had been loyal to the institution, devoted to the man leading it, and I had confused that loyalty with faith. Same building, same role, wrong object of worship. When I finally saw it clearly, I realized what I needed to do. I needed to stop organizing my life around a pastor and start organizing it around Christ. I needed to stop doing what I thought the institution needed from me and start doing what I actually believed God was calling me to do, including walking with the man in that church who needed somebody beside him, not the pastor, not the program, just a man willing to show up. That is when the performance started to stop. Not all at once, but that is where the turn happened. Somewhere in all of this, I mentioned to my current pastor that I wanted to go deeper in the Bible, to know the Bible better, not just to know about it, actually know it. He told me something simple. He said everything you need is in the Gospels. If you really want to know it, read a Gospel a day for 30 days. I read for 32 days straight, 8 times through the Gospels, walking and reading on my phone, not listening, reading every single day. And what came out the other side was not that I had all the answers. I want to be clear about that. What came out was that I no longer had to pretend I did. I knew enough to be confident, and I knew enough to say, I don't know, without it threatening me, without it feeling like exposure. That is a form of stopping the performance too. The performance of having it figured out, the performance of certainty. When you have actually set in the Word, you do not need to manage what people think you know. You just know what you know, and you are at peace with the rest. Here's what I can tell you from the other side of all of that. When Christ is your reference point, the audience disappears. I'm no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. I let what is going to happen happen, and that does not mean I sit back and do nothing. Actually, the opposite is true. I take more action now than I ever did when I was focused on managing my image, but it comes from a completely different place. Obedience instead of performance, faithfulness instead of fear. Judgment slides off now, not because I got tougher, not because I built some kind of wall, because the audience changed. When you are no longer accountable to perception, there is nothing to be protected. And when there's nothing to protect, you can be surprisingly open. Peace in the middle of trying times. That is not a cliche for me. That is just what it is now. 4 layers of performance: concealment, self sufficiency, institutional loyalty, false confidence. Christ was the exit from every single one. Not a program, not a pastor, not a church, just Him. All Him. And here is what I want to say to the man who is in the building right now, serving and leading and showing up, while privately wondering if he actually belongs there. You do not have to keep managing that gap. You do not have to have it figured out to be honest with Christ about where you actually are. That honesty is not disqualifying. For me, it was the beginning of everything. Stop managing what people think of you. Start being honest with Him about where you are. And if you do not have that relationship with Christ yet, if you are still outside looking in, wondering if there's room for you, that is exactly where we start. And sometimes you find it through a door that does not look like a church door at all. You just have to walk through whatever door opens. We do what we can do, and we let Jesus do what only He can do. If you're new here, the Steady Man series is a 50-episode walkthrough what it looks like to build a life of faith, character, and steady manhood. This is episode 37. Every episode builds. Start wherever you are. Hit subscribe if you want to keep walking through this with me, and I'll see you in the next one, doing it one day better.